keep an eye on the attendees.
I think you guys are going to have to teach me how to get the picture on the screen so it looks like I'm actually here. Otherwise, I just have my name.
Looks like there's 3, see, 4, 5.
I think we're all here now.
Okay. Good evening, everyone. We welcome you to the San Mateo Union High School District Board study session this evening. We were in closed session, and for the record, no action was taken in closed session. Roll call, Trustee Andrade Zuniga. You're muted, but you're here.
Here.
Trustee Land.
Here.
Trustee Lees Dwyer.
Present.
Trustee Hanley.
Yes.
I'm here, so we're all here. Boy, calls for a pledge of allegiance on the agenda. Normally, we do not do that, but the superintendent's rising, so we better rise and lead us in the pledge, please, sir.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. This is a public meeting of the San Mateo Union High School District Board of Trustees. If you wish to make a comment about an agenda item, please send an email to comments@smuhsd.org. That's smuhsd.org with your name, email address, and your Zoom name if different, and the item under which you would like to comment. The board president will call on you. Please note that comments are limited to 3 minutes. The board president may increase or decrease the time allowed for public presentation depending on the topic and number of persons wishing to speak. Superintendent, you want to take the next item?
I'm sure. We're asking you to first approve the Second Amendment to the purchase and sale agreement and joint escrow instructions for the sale of Crestmore School site to D.R. Horton Bay Incorporated.
I move approval.
Second.
Okay, trustees Lees Dwyer with the motion, trustee Land with the second, trustee Andrade Zuniga, how do you vote?
Yes.
Trustee Land,
Yes.
trustees Lees Dwyer,
Yes.
trustee Hanley.
Yes.
I vote yes, and so the action passes 5-0.
Ms. Chalkley, do you have something that you'd like to announce here?
I got a message from one of our principals that there may be a problem with the Zoom link on the website. So I'm going to update that right now. So if you're out there watching on YouTube, I'm going to update the Zoom link. So if you want to join the Zoom portion of the meeting, you should be able to do that in just a few moments.
And perhaps Ms. Shu, who's on board, may be able to tell you how she got there, and we can instruct folks to do that. But I think we should proceed. let's see, we have a budget study session tonight. This is one of the important things that the board does is pass a budget every year that allocates funds. It signals the priorities of the district and the areas of attention. To lead us tonight through the budget is our new, relatively new CBO, Mr. Yancey Hawkins. I guess this is month 3 for you in the position. So we look forward to hearing that. And then also tonight, we'll have the Expanded Learning Opportunity Grant, which Dr. Kemke will go through. These two items are tied this year. The ELO is something new, but we look forward to going over it with you and the public. So with that, I'm going to turn this over to you, Mr. Hawkins, and I believe you're going to share, we'll share the presentation materials as we go along.
All righty. Thank you. All right, we got the presentation up.
We opened it. I have it.
All right, can everyone see that okay?
Yep.
Great. All right, I wanted to first start by thanking Trustee Hanley and Trustee Land. They are the budget subcommittee of the board, and they were very helpful in preparing this presentation and giving feedback to that. So I just wanted to start out by saying thank you to them. And then I wanted to go on to say a real hearty thank you to Valerie Miller and Vanessa Castano in my office. If you want to know who's doing the really, really hard work of getting all these numbers perfect, it's them. So they've just been amazing, and as well as Rose Chai in our office. So that's a little thank you before we start. This presentation is going to be similar to the presentation you've seen in prior years around the general fund budget study sessions. I'll be making some small changes as we move forward. But I always like to start out with kind of the themes of what we're going into. The first theme, which is no surprise to anyone, is still uncertainty, around COVID, around COVID funding, around looking at our assessed value. This last year or 15 months has been the largest time of uncertainty and ups and downs in school finance, maybe in the last, since Proposition 13, maybe. So really important that it's been a year of unpredictability. And I thank the board for their leadership and keeping adequate reserve levels and financial prudence over these years, putting us in a good position. The second theme is around one-time revenues related to the pandemic, whether that be federal and state. We've heard a lot about one-time expenses, primarily related to the pandemic, the changes in learning styles. Our teachers are amazing. They've been, changing learning styles, too many times I can't count. But with that came, additional expenditures to support our students and our teachers. On the flip side of that, there's been one-time loss of revenue. So a lot of our community service revenues, including facility use fee, transportation fees, those went by the wayside this year as we shut down. And on the flip side of that, we have some one-time savings in expenditures. The district tried really hard over this year to look at every position that opened up and, in this pandemic and said, is this a position that we need to fill right now, or can we wait until we fully opened up? So really one time is a theme. And then the last one is really the importance of looking at ongoing revenues and matching those when making commitments going further. You're going to hear some stuff about one-time money and one-time commitments, but I still want to focus on always looking at ongoing revenues when we're looking at making ongoing commitments moving forward. All right, with that, next page, next slide. So just to give you a brief overview of what we'll go over the enrollment and projections. Obviously, this is key as in the enrollment drives our staffing. The second item is we'll look specifically at those staffing projections, both on our certificated side, including our teachers and our classified support staff. We'll focus on our STRS and PERS increases. Those are our state mandated retirement systems. We'll look at employee compensation. We'll spend a good amount of time on those one-time pandemic related relief funds, and then get into the budget assumptions, take a look at the overall estimated actuals and tentative budget for 2021, 2022, and then really take some time to go over what are really the next steps as we move forward. Next slide. So I did the math. We can't afford the cat. So, and I apologize if there's any cat lovers out there with this one. You can just flip it around and imagine a cat saying, I did the math, I can't afford the dog. But it's always just a little fun to go into the presentation. Next slide. So what factors, really impact our budget? In terms of a revenue side, the by far largest revenue driver is our assessed value growth. We monitor that with the San Mateo County Assessed Value Tracker. We also get a lot of information from the San Mateo County Office of Education that involves both revenues as well as expenditure side of the budget. The federal budget, this specifically, we're looking at federal pandemic relief funds. Those were those CARES funds in the fall, and the ESSER funds in the summer and winter that we've received. The state budget, as we are a community funded district, the state budget isn't as strong towards us as some other districts that you'll see in the county and throughout the state. But the state budget does include one-time revenues this year around pandemic. And Governor Newsom has noted some additional items that we might see in tomorrow's May revision that we'll see. Enrollment projections. Our enrollment projections were approved by the board in February, but enrollment drives our primary staffing. So those are obviously important. Collective bargaining, as always, working with our partners, our labor partners in collective bargaining always is important when looking at the overall budget. Changes to the payroll taxes, retirement, health and welfare benefits. This has primarily been retirement related in the last few years, and specifically our STRS and PERS, but also looking at those payroll taxes, including in a pandemic, unemployment taxes, and health and welfare benefits that have been on a increasing trajectory, at least for the last 20 plus years. Also, obviously, COVID-19. We've gotten some great news over the last couple of weeks, including the approval for 12 to 15-year-olds to receive the vaccine, as well as the CDC guidance today that changed the guidance on mask requirements. We'll see how that impacts schools moving forward. But this COVID-19 pandemic has been a roller coaster. So we obviously will keep watching that, and hopefully we are on the continue on this trajectory, but we'll continue to watch that. Special education costs. Lastly, the federal government and the state government continue to fail to meet their commitment to fund the full costs of educating our students with IEPs. So those the costs related to those services continue to impact our overall budget, as special education costs are about 20% of the overall district budget. Next slide, please. In terms of an overall enrollment, the projection for the district minus the DTech charter school, which has approximately 600 students, is 9,141 going into 2021, 2022. While this is about a 1.5% projected increase over the 2020-2021 year, that was the current year was about a 2% drop from the 1920 year. So the 2021-2022 year looks about on par with the 2019-2020 year in terms of enrollment. It's important to look as we go out into the out years that we're projecting a slow but a steady growth, decline in enrollment district-wide. And as you look towards the end of the next decade, our projections actually see that start increasing in the 2028, 2029, and 2030 years with some more significant potential decreases. But obviously, we'll monitor that as we get closer. Until then, we're looking at a little bit under an average of 0.5% decline over the next 5 years. I'm going to go through, next slide. I'm going to go through the individual sites and just pretty quickly, but I'll hit on a couple. Aragon is the one school that we are projecting an increase at that didn't see a corresponding decrease in the current year. So it saw about a 1.5% increase this year, and we're projecting a 4.3% increase in going into 2021, 2022. Next slide. For Burlingame is relatively flat from 2019-20 and 2020-2021. Next slide. Cappuccino, on the flip side, from Aragon, we're projecting a 5% decrease in our enrollment at Cappuccino after about a little under a 3% decrease in the current year. If you look out 10 years, I think it's important to look at CAP, because we're projecting over a 15% decrease in enrollment at that site over the next 10 years. So we'll be obviously watching that very carefully. Next slide. For Hillsdale, Hillsdale is projected to be down a little bit over last year. Next slide. And then Mills is projected to be up 2.6, but that's relatively flat over 2019-20 numbers, as we saw a little bit under a 4% drop from the Mills population in the current year. So basically just under the amount they had in 2019-20. Next slide. Similarly, San Mateo saw about a 5% reduction in enrollment in the current year and is projected to gain much of that back, but really over a 3-year period, still projecting pretty flat. Next slide. Peninsula High School, obviously, given the program, fluctuates based on student need, but our projections show approximately 170 students at Peninsula High School in 2021, 2022, and pretty steady across the next 10 years. But that's obviously based on need, and we will monitor that need moving forward. Next slide. The next few slides, you might have to put on your reading glasses to get all of these, but I did think it was important to put all of that in there because it really gives all of our detail of our staffing. But if you, next slide, please. If you go to an overall, Trustee Hanley, we are working on a slide that we talked about for future presentations, but I do have a little information for you there. The total of 538 FTE certificated staffing, that compares to 541 certificated staff that was in the last year's budget, so down a couple. But I do want to note, if we can go to the previous slide, we have not included the staffing for foundation and grants, which makes up the most of that difference. So really, from year to year, our certificated staffing is basically flat. Next slide, 2 slides ahead, actually. In terms of classified staffing, if we can go next 2 slides up, or sorry, thank you. The overall classified staffing, sorry, one more, I apologize. Overall staffing is for a little under 430 FTE for our classified staffing. That is up over our 2020, 2021 levels by approximately 20 FTE. So it's important to note what that is. 10 of that FTE are actually unfilled, potentially positions related to the pandemic. And so those are funded by restricted sources, those one-time coronavirus pandemic sources, and will not be filled if they are not needed. So those are in there if needed. If they're not needed, that would free up some of the pandemic related relief for other items. We also saw about a net 7 increase in instructional aids related to special education. And that's very specifically related to individual need of students with an IEP, as well as the increase we added based on our enrollment numbers, a special education class moving into 2021, 2022. So, all right, next slide. The state mandated contributions to the retirement system, the STRS and PERS retirement systems continue to be a negative pressure on our budget. As we look towards next year, School Services of California has recommended the rate of 16.92%. I want to be clear that that is above the statutory rate that is in law right now of 15.92%. But in 2021, 2022, the STRS board has been given the authority and has signaled that they will increase their rate by 1%. As part of the STRS, the STRS plan back in 2013, when the rate increased, when the rate that districts had to pay over a 7-year period was increased from a little over 8% to 19%, as you can see in the out years. The additional authority that was given was that the STRS board would have the ability to increase that rate by 1%. So School Services of California has recommended that we do that. And our projected rate is 16.9%. And then if you look in the out years, it's out to 19%. As the board knows, the state used some one-time money over the last couple of years to give districts relief from those increases in STRS rates. And so back in 2022, 2023, they'll go back to the statutory rates that were approved by the legislature. Next slide, please. PERS, the PERS rate, these are for our classified employees. These rates continue to project an increase. We're looking at approximately a 2% increase from the current year into 2021, 2022. And in the out years, a pretty significant increase of 3% in 22, 23, and another % in 23, 24. It's important to note that the PERS board actually has the authority to set all rates, whereas the STRS board used to not, and now they have authority only over that 1% potential increase. But as you can note, that red line in 2023, 2024, we're projecting that overall driven costs, including that PERS retirement, at over 35%. So definitely an increase of about 12%, even over less than 5 years ago. Next slide. In terms of employee compensation, I wanted to note a couple of things that are included in the budget. We note AV growth as obviously AV growth, our assessed value growth is very linked to potential salary increases. We've projected a 4% AV growth for the year. Our county AV tracker is as it is 3.95 as of today. Also, we've included a 2% salary increase into our budget projections. Obviously, that salary increase is subject to negotiation. In terms of employee compensation costs, step and column cost is approximately 1.2% or $1.4 million, and the cost of 1% hovers around $1.2 million. Next slide. All right, I want to spend a little bit of time going over this. This was one of the three themes of the budget study session, one-time funding. I'm going to break these three into three different categories. The first is the money that's already been spent. Then I'll go into a group that's already been spent or committed by this board. And the last that is pending board action. So Senate Bill 117 was the initial Senate bill when COVID-19 pandemic started. It was a relatively small amount of money at that time, but that obviously has been spent. In the 2020-2021 Budget Act, the district received about $4.8 million in what you've likely heard called CARES funding, although it was a mix between federal and state money. That money has been expended primarily in the summer and the fall, as well as the ESSER 1 funding that was allocated in the spring of 2020 or spring to summer of 2020. Those have been expended. So those have expended and the reporting has been done on those. This spring, the state legislature approved and the governor signed into law AB 86. This was an additional approximately $9 million in funding. The $3 million in-person instruction grant, these funds have been either expended or committed. These were related to safety costs, including health aides. This includes testing costs. This included technology costs related to the district starting in person. So those have been expended or committed fully at this time. The last category of that is the $6.2 million, is the pending board action. So later tonight, I won't go into it a lot because Julia and Brian are going to spend a lot of time on it. But the AB 86 Expanded Learning Opportunity Grant. So that's been included in the 21-22 budget, the expenditures. And you will see a presentation on that after this presentation. It's important to note, the other funding is the ESSER 2 funding. This is related to the December pandemic relief bill that was passed by the United States government and signed into law. And we'll see about $1.1 million in that. It's important to note that those two funding sources of about $7 million are going to be included as revenue in the current year, but those expenditures are primarily going to be included in the 2021, 2022 and out year budgets. So it definitely makes our financials look a little bit wonky because you see $7 million of revenue coming in this year, and then you see those not expended in the current year, but expended in the out years. All right, next slide, please. Of the two types of fundings that are pending board approval, the much smaller amount is the ESSER funds. The ESSER funds must be used in specific categories under the ESSA, which is the Every Student Succeeds Act, or the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act, the IDEA. So there's about $1.1 million of those funds available as we move on. Next slide. Here's some of the other ways those funds can be used, but they are limited to these and the ESSA and the IDEA. Next slide, please. The ELL grant, I noted about $6.2 million. I won't spend a lot of time again because Julia and Brian have a lot more detail. But the thing I'd like to note is this is much more restricted funding. So unfortunately, the larger dollar amount is much more restricted in our use. It has to be spent in these 7 specific categories, which the presentation later will go into a little bit more. Next slide. All right. Getting down to really the details. In terms of our revenues, we're projecting a 4% AV growth. As I noted, as of today, our AV tracker was at 3.95%. Unsecured taxes have been brought down to their historical rates. And there's a lot more volatility in unsecured taxes. These are business assets. These include the planes at SFO. So we see a lot more volatility in those. So we've brought those down to the historical averages. Also, redevelopment agency revenues. The redevelopment agency revenues that come through to the school district, there has been a change in 2020, 2021, based on recent court cases down in San Diego and affirmed by the appellate courts. And so there was a change in the current year, which saw some additional RDA revenue come. And so for a conservative, we're bringing that down a little bit moving forward into 21, 22. In terms of federal and state, you see pretty large decreases in both of those. These are almost 100% related to those one-time pandemic related money that was received in or is received or is scheduled to be received in the current year. So all of those have been taken out of the budget, at about 15 million. And then in terms of local revenue, we always pull out the local grants and donations that we receive, and we only budget those as they received. So that local revenue of $1.8 million, it's likely that we will see those revenues come back into the budget as we get through the 2021, 2022 year. But I think it's important that per our process, we don't account for those until they are received. Next slide. When we look at certificated salaries, we include our step and column cost of approximately 1.2%. We also have included in this budget a 2% cost of living and related to our negotiations, as well as some ELO related grant expenses. In terms of classified, we again have our step and column movement. We have the 2% cost of living built into the budget. The ELO grant requires 10% of those funds to be used on paraeducators. So that's included, as well as the instructional aids that I noted in the earlier staffing section. It's also important to note, as you can see, this number is higher, is the significant number of our unfilled positions in the current year were classified positions related to students not being on campus. So these were positions related to support services for students that were not needed in the current year, but will be needed in the out years. In terms of employee benefits, I noted STRS, which had a 1% increase, but one thing that really is going to hit the district next year is the unemployment insurance rate. For about the last 10 years, the district has been paying a rate of about 0.05% of its payroll in unemployment. Well, we've received the notice that our unemployment rate will be 1.23% next year. So over a percent increase for that unemployment. And that's really specifically related to the COVID pandemic and all of the related unemployment that went there. So some pretty significant increases in employee benefit costs, as well as the costs for those unfilled positions that were not included in this year's budget, but will be included in the out year budgets. Next slide, please. In terms of books and supplies. A lot of this is related to the ELO and SR2 funding. Those will be updated as the board approves those plans. So those actually might be moved into other categories as needed. And in terms of services and others, obviously we have a bunch of one-time COVID expenses coming out. Those are somewhat offset by new one-time ELO expenses. But two areas I did want to highlight is utilities. We saw some significant utility savings in the current year as we didn't have students on campus a majority of the year. Those utility costs will be back in 2021, 2022. And then one item is our property and liability insurance. We're seeing about a 40 to 50% increase in our property and liability insurance, and that's primarily around fire risk, specifically in Northern California, as well as other liability, including SAM cases that have been coming more prevalent across the state. Next slide. In terms of other outgo, the increase, a large portion of the increase is related to increased costs for our students that are placed in the San Mateo County Office of Ed Special Education Program. That program is projected at a 5% increase, or about 200,000 on that. In terms of transfer out, we do see a little bit of savings there related to the food service program. The food service program in the current year, obviously with students not on campus and no a la carte sales, had a little bit higher contribution in the current year. Next slide. All right, so what do all those things come together? All those details, they come together around our estimated actuals, which is how we estimate that we will end the current year, as well as the 2021-2022 budget. A couple of the, we are seeing, because of one-time savings, the unrestricted general fund increase in 2020, 2021. On the restricted side, though, I do need to point out that you'll see a very significant surplus in the restricted side of about just under $7.5 million. But you really need to focus as well on the 2021, 2022 budget. You see the restricted side with about a $7.5 million deficit. This is directly related to the ELO and ESSER funds, those COVID relief funds that are being received in the current year, but spent in 2021, 2022. In 2021, 2022, we are showing a small deficit of about 830,000 on the unrestricted side, although that is covered by the surplus from the 2020, 2021 year. And we still are above the 12% basic aid reserve that the board has passed. Next slide. All right, so next steps. Where are we going from here? Tomorrow, the state's gonna announce its May revise. We've heard a couple of small things coming out of it. We used to hear huge leaks of the plans, days in advance. So I was hoping to be able to give you some real detail on that. But unfortunately, Governor Newsom seems to have locked it up like a Star Wars or a Marvel movie. No leaks out of the May revise this year. So hopefully we'll get that moving forward. We'll continue to monitor the assessed valuation tracker. As we noted, the assessed value growth for our secured taxes is our primary driver of revenue increases to cover additional costs. Tonight, you'll hear about the ELO plan that will be up for adoption on the May 20th board meeting. We'll continue to manage those COVID-19 one-time funds. This is the most one-time funds that districts have, I believe, ever have received in a school year in terms of total dollar amounts or percentage of their budgets. So that'll continue to be a key item. We'll obviously be working with our ed services side and ensuring that our budget plan aligns with our district's goal and the LCAP that's scheduled to be adopted with the budget on June 24th. We'll continue to manage fund balance and our financial resources to maintain fiscal solvency. And then to my last point in terms of themes, resist using future projected dollars or one-time monies to justify paying for ongoing expenditures. So really focusing on if we're going to make long-term ongoing commitments, those have to be funded by long-term ongoing revenue sources. I think we can pull it down off. And I am happy to open it up to questions. Oh, thank you, Valerie and Vanessa, for being here to back me up for some of those detailed questions. I appreciate it.
Trustees, Lees, Dwyer.
Whoops, let me video here.
Mr. Griffin, I
Okay.
do want to remind you, we have one public speaker, Miss Mary
Okay,
Rustia.
let's hear the
Go ahead and
public.
take her first.
Yeah, let's hear the public comment.
Okay, so I'm up.
Good evening.
Hi, good evening. My name is Mary Rustia, and I've been teaching at Mills High School since 1991. And I'm here to speak about how I would like to see you focus your work and spending of that $6 million of extended learning opportunity funds. I'd like to start by referring back to that page 31, the budget study. And the last bullet says, resist using future projected dollars on one-time monies to justify paying for ongoing expenditures. I agree, but I want to also add a bullet. Ensure that one-time money are spent for this one time. The closest clients are your teachers and your students, particularly next year's freshmen and sophomores. These students, they were just 13 when the world shut down. They've been locked up for 14 months. And as you know, this pandemic was not equal. Our Black and brown students live in neighborhoods where their families did not feel safe letting them walk out on their own. So I am asking you to make freshman and sophomore class sizes smaller. Fund sections, release those funds now. Next year is the last working school week, and then it's finals week. And some of your best teachers have some great ideas, okay? So here's an example. At Mills, I was talking to the PE teacher. The 3 PE teachers just want 2 more sections. They currently have 7 sections of PE. Next year, they would love 9 sections of PE for freshmen. That would match the 9 sections of bio. And then we would collaborate and create this social emotional learning curriculum that would get the students out and moving and creating personal goals and team building and communications. This is what students love to learn in lab and PE. And we include the VAPA. And then you wrap that with a counselor. So as the trauma unfolds, we're ready to respond. Each site, they have the answers. You've got to let the teachers know you've got their back, and let them know now. Don't wait till June 1st. I beg of you. I attended the PTO meeting to hear alumni students talk, and guess what they mentioned that they like the most? Extracurricular activities. I mentioned to my current freshmen, you need a 2.0 to participate. All of a sudden, grades were improving. You know, this is what students get motivated around. I'll close by just saying again, in the other part, the Extended Learning Opportunity Grant, it says that you're going to ask to, some input. Well, I'm CTA, and we need to see you come to the teachers and ask for more input. So, as our superintendent likes to say, here we go. I like to say, stay healthy, stay curious. Thank you for your time.
Thank you for your comments. Okay, trustees, Lee's Dwyer, I think you were
Yes.
on deck.
Okay. I'm on. Okay. First, I'd like to say that was a really good presentation. And it didn't even seem like a first time presentation. So to the supporting cast, Vanessa and Valerie, great job. To Yancy, great job. You really connected all the dots and you made it really understandable and compact at the same time. So I want to thank you for that. The one comment I have is that I really question whether our enrollment's going to decline. And that is because there's so much housing going up within our communities. And so the people who project the enrollment, we have to pay attention to it, obviously, because the more numbers you have, that you have to divide the big number, and then that makes less per student. But at the same time, we just really, I think we're not going to see the decline that they're projecting, given all of the housing that's going up. So I know you're keeping your eye on them, but I wouldn't really rely on that data. So that's it, my comment. Thank you again, all three of you.
Trustee Hanley.
Yeah, I think it was a very good presentation too, and I know you worked very hard on it, and I appreciate the chance to give you some input from the budget committee on it. I have so I know a lot of my questions got answered in the course of us talking it through it. The insurance question, I guess, got my attention. I'm wondering why it's going up so much for us. I mean, none of our schools are like in the middle of a forest, so I don't see our schools being in danger of catching on fire anymore now than they were, 5 years ago, 10 years ago, 20 years ago. Even though, we are affected by, the climate change and so forth, but not like we are if we're in a rural district that is in the middle of a forest. So I'm not understanding quite why that's happening.
No, that's a great question, and it comes back to kind of the place that schools are brought in. School districts in the state of California do not. At one point they did, but they don't buy insurance through your typical insurance broker. We don't have a insurance policy with State Farm or that. What we do have is a pooled risk model in the state of California, which means that sometimes fortunately, sometimes unfortunately, we are linked with many other districts overall. So while at the highest level of our claims, we do have insurance called our excess insurance layer through the San Mateo County Schools Insurance Group. The small and medium layers of our insurance are through shared risk pools. And those pools are, potentially hit by other districts who are impacted. So because of the pooled risk model in which we acquire insurance, other districts, what's happening impact us more. So it's not it's a huge impact. And this is something that I know that the California School Board Association is actually getting involved in around supporting insurance, because our rate increase is 40%, but we're seeing some districts that are going up 100+%. And we're also seeing some districts that basically can't get fire coverage anymore without deductibles in the neighborhood of $5 and $10 million. So I wish I could say, Trustee Hanley, that this problem is going to be going away. But I think we're probably going to continue to see this as we move on. There also, like I noted, there also is some significant exposure due to SAM liability, which has increased the exposure for school districts and other youth organizations. So that's another piece of that.
The one other thing I wanted to, point out, and I think that we need to continue to make some provisions for is the PERS and STIRS issue is, it's, I don't know whether artificially is the right word, but we've been subsidized to some degree by the fact that the states had some surplus funds and been able to pay down the difference. But I think your graph really showed what the difference is. And I think, at some point, somebody's going to come for that difference, I'm afraid. And it could be rather sudden and there's a lot of difference in there. So I think we need to be planning that at some point, we could get really hit. And it could be a sizable chunk of money that hits into our budget for the difference between where the rates really are and what we're paying right now. So that continues to be a concern of mine.
Yeah, unfortunately, I agree with you, Trustee Hanley, on that. And we are putting those in the out years of our projections, based on the recommendations from the state and from School Services of California.
Trustee Land.
Thank you. Again, Yancy and Vanessa and Valerie, excellent job. Seamless from last year to this year. So you trained him well, ladies.
They did.
I do want to comment on a few things. Ms. Rustia's comments really intrigued me because in our budget committee, we talked about this. And Peter and I mentioned it to you guys about the one-time funds to be creative and innovative, but really make some section changes and things that we need right now. And that's something that I'm going to emphasize to both the superintendent and Yancy, that we do need to figure out ways that we can make some adjustments and really push on this. So not only am I saying it from the budget committee, but now that I heard it again from a teacher, I think it's something that we really need to explore. It's interesting because the insights that she brought up were some of the things we were talking and mentioning about this, creating sections, decreasing things temporarily that can really serve the purpose for the kids immediately, especially with the incoming freshmen, the sophomores, our at-risk kids. I think we have opportunities here. And I know we're presenting the ELO report next. So I hope that we keep being creative and innovative, that we look to the sites and for ideas, and that we are not closed off to those. And I think that's important. The other thing I'm going to mention is, I think now I'm talking to the board members, the whole concern that Peter has, I do too, with STIRS and PERS and that the big encroachment that we have. And yes, it doesn't look as bad because we were supported for 2 years with one-time monies. And I bet that's going to happen again, but that's going to run out. We're not going to get that. The minute the economy changes, the minute we have revenues at the state level go down, it's going to be a disaster. And we're going to have to really come up with percentages to support the STIRS. And they're going to make it, and they're going to put it on the districts again. So again, for the board members, advocacy, I'm on the delegate assembly. I'm going to bring this up one more time to them. But I think we need a concerted effort. And Yancy, if you have any information to help me make an argument, I would be more than happy to get that across. So anyway, really great presentation. I really got it. Thank you.
Yancy, I got a couple of comments, and it was a good presentation. It wasn't like it was your first budget presentation ever. So I think you did a good job, but we expected that you would do a good job. Couple of things here, and one of them doesn't really focus on the budget. It focuses on the declining enrollment and the small schools. And at some point, we're going to have to deal with the reality of what size how small can a comprehensive high school get to and still be a comprehensive high school and not cost us a lot of money, the disproportionate amount of money. So, I mean, we're continuing to see declining enrollment to the north of the district. And the last time we saw that was 76. What year was that?
About that.
Somewhere along there where we ended up with the surplus campus, which is still with us. But I think we have to examine that, but that's not a current year budget issue, but it's an issue the district needs to be aware of as we go down the road. The other thing, what are we doing? And we talked about this, I think, at the second interim. The property tax reassessments. Did you change any of the assumptions? Or are you kind of holding, what is it, $1.5 million in the contra account?
Correct. Yeah. Actually, I think we're holding a little bit more than that in the contra account at this point to offset any potential 1 year. President Griffin notes that if reassessments happen anywhere in the county, they are spread across all districts for 1 year and then to their home district in years after that. So the board has very, I think, smartly put aside some funding to cover that, if that may be. But I think we need to be watching that very carefully, President Griffin, because we're looking at Oracle, moving. We're looking at the pandemic having people forced out of their offices. And I'm sure there's a lot of really smart tax accountants and attorneys who are looking for ways to save money right now. So I agree. We need to be watching that very carefully, especially in the next year.
Okay, and then your UI rate is only on it, so everybody doesn't think it's on our entire payroll. It's only on the first $6,000. Is it 6,000 or 7,000? Let's see, it's $7,000 is the UI limit, and so the rate. Some of you people over there in accounting, shake your head. Is it $7,000? The wage base for UI?
No, for schools, it's on the full boat.
How did you guys? Why is that?
I think it's how they've, we pay what the state requires us.
Well, yeah, but I mean, commercial employers, the FUI and the UI rates are based on a wage base up to like $7,000.
Traditionally, schools have kept that rate extremely low because it's been over the entire salary. So it's been at 0.05% for the last 10 years. So, obviously very, very small portion.
But I mean, it's on everybody's full salary.
It's on everybody's full salaries for the school's pool. We're directly related. So
then that's a different pool than
correct.
The commercial employers in the state.
Yes, it's the school's pool, and we have a separate rate, and we pay the same as every district in the state, with the exception of some. There's a few that take increases based on their usage of that.
Boy, now that is a tremendous amount of money.
Yeah, it's approximately a little over $1.1 million impact. The hope is that it's not, ongoing for more than, a few years. But there has obviously been, the pool has been used significantly over the last year in the pandemic, with all the loosening restrictions and increases in the unemployment benefit by the state, obviously not by the federal government, but the state's impact.
Yeah, I mean, California is out of compliance. I think everybody was paying higher rates because California's wasn't paying their fair share of the unemployment. Then the last thing, just for all the board members, I think the first thing I learned when I showed up here, ongoing money supports ongoing programs, one-time money for one-time programs. We're getting this money It's special money. We got some very special needs when we program it. It needs to be programmed that way with the expiration date, and it needs to convert into something else. So we need to be very, very judicious about how we spend that money. It's precious. So thank you for the budget present. Oh, Greg, you got another comment?
Just to your comment, I agree with you, but I believe that we can be creative and innovative for a short period of time with the one-time monies.
Works for me.
Hmm.
So we'll all see the May revised tomorrow, and we'll all see where we're going. Okay, thank you. So we're going to move on to the ELO.
Correct. I'm going to turn this item over to Dr. Kemke, and if we could promote Mr. Simmons, I think he's involved as well.
Yes, thank you. So I'll get us started and then pass it over to Mr. Simmons. So this is just our overview for the Expanded Learning Opportunities Grant, providing you kind of the outline of what this grant is and where we're proposing to spend this money. So you can go to the next slide. So the district has been granted $6.2 million by the state of California to support the transition back to in-person learning, specific to learning in the classroom. We'll talk about the 7 areas in which the state has asked us to talk through the funding. 10% of these resources are earmarked for paraprofessional investment. So that's a required piece of the grants. You'll see how we've worked that into this presentation. And this is a grant period from essentially right now until next summer. I think we have to expend these by August 2022. So it's one-time funding for this coming year. And you can go to the next slide. So you saw this earlier in Yancey's presentation, but we thought this was a nice visual on kind of the allowable uses of the grant. It includes extending the instructional learning time beyond minimum requirements. So you'll see some of our proposals around how we'll use the funds to do that type of work. Integrated supports specific to addressing students' barriers to learning. So we know students are going to come back with varying levels of trauma, distress, and anxiety just based on what has happened over the last year. So this part of the funding is talking about how will you support students transition back to in-person learning. It includes back to before and after school programs. And like I said, programs that address student trauma and the social emotional learning that we know needs to be integrated into our programs to support students. Staff training to engage students and families in addressing the social emotional health and academic needs. Again, a lot has happened over the last year, including what we're calling racial trauma, the trauma associated with the pandemic, all of which that we need to address as students enter back into our classrooms. So you'll see pieces of that in this presentation. Also just identifying and making sure that we're actually putting the resources where they are needed. So we are looking at diagnostic and ways to monitor our progress and benchmark assessments to take a look at that. So we also set aside some there. And then accelerating progress to close learning gaps. How are we going to kind of wrap around services for students? Their tutoring programs, materials designed to kind of accelerate and support students, and English language proficiency, and then staff training in this area as well. I do want to mention that as usual with these types of supplemental or one-time funding like this, it is focused on some of our most marginalized students. So low-income English learner, students with special needs, students that have become homeless or have been impacted greatly by the pandemic are the ones that the money should be kind of focused towards. The community learning hubs that provide access to technology and other academic supports. We do hope that our main program will be in person, but having some hubs on campus if students we're hoping and proposing to do some more creative courses so students may log into that course from their campus, and it might be a virtual course, but we need spaces for them to do that if it is during an extended time. And then the last area is the supports for students who need additional supports if they've become credit deficient during this time. And so we are investing in summer school this summer, and then we are going to start planning for a really robust summer school for next summer as well. And we're also thinking about ways to integrate that recovery of credit through the year. So now I'm going to pass it over to Mr. Simmons Bryan, who's going to go through kind of the details of each one of these sections and how we're breaking down that funding.
Thanks, Dr. Kemke. Good evening, board members and cabinet. As you can see on this slide, the first element of our proposed plan is related to accelerating student progress. We anticipate investing about $1.3 million for a variety of direct support services for students, including the purchase of a pair of assessment tools for assessing student need, both academic and social emotional, some FTE that would be allocated to sites for intervention courses, and some intervention resources allocated to sites to enable some creative structures for mentoring and supporting students that have actually been started during the pandemic. And those students who will struggle with the transition back to in-person learning. And then finally, there are some resources here to support paraeducators as prescribed by the legislation that approved this California state funding. Next slide, please. This next portion of the resources are proposed to be used to support some innovative course offerings, and that's both innovation in the time of day as well as the topics themselves. Next slide, please. In addition to the investments in our credit recovery, options, we are also proposing to invest a significant amount of resources for just next year to support student mental health needs. Since we anticipate an increase in needs for the fall, as Dr. Kemke indicated. And we're also proposing investments in a district social worker as suggested by the DLAC earlier this spring. Finally, we have a need and will need to continue to provide an extended suite of digital tools that we initiated this year for one more year. And we'll spend this next year trimming this investment down to a core set of digital tools in the 22-23 school year. Next slide, please. The next element of the proposed investments are related to professional learning to support our renewed engagement with anti-racism for all staff, both certificated and classified. This includes resources for paying for the contract with our new partners, Joe Truss and Shane Saphir, as well as resources to compensate staff for engagements beyond their workday, both during the school year and what we imagine to be the summer of 21 and the summer of 2022. In addition, there are resources proposed to go toward other key professional learning priorities that are listed there. Next slide, please. This next portion of proposed investments are devoted to supporting our ongoing summer school implementation, both for this upcoming summer and the next. As we delineated to the board in a weekly last week that we submitted last week, we have a robust set of offerings this summer, both in person and virtual, and we anticipate a robust set of summer offerings next summer as well, when we hope to offer some new and innovative approaches to learning, acceleration, and credit recovery. In addition to the resources for summer school, we are also proposing to use the resources to add ELD staff to Peninsula so that when appropriate, more English learners can take advantage of the alternative programs at Peninsula and the rapid securing of credits that can happen there. Next slide, please. Finally, this last set of resources intended to support an expanded role for our libraries to provide support throughout the day for both intervention as well as traditional tutoring. The key here is that we propose to use these resources to target support to our historically underserved groups of students, as opposed to what we've done historically, which is a more passive, homework center after school sort of program. We're really looking to target support during this time period. Next slide, please. So this slide is just a summary of the proposed investments. I'm going to now hand this back to Dr. Kemke to review the process of stakeholder engagement and the next steps. Dr. Kemke.
So you can go to the next slide. So this is a piece of the stakeholder engagement is bringing this here to you today. And we also have talked with our equity advisory committee about this grant. They've usually focusing on the LCAP because we have this new grant. We did reach out to them. It's composed of teachers, staff members, community members, parents. And so they provided some input here. We've shared this initial draft with our leadership in DTA and CSEA, and we also plan to send out a survey for our staff. I think we're going to open that next week just to get some more creative ideas generated, because right now we're just approving big buckets of where we propose to put this monies, we can still, consider some of that input as we move forward. We've worked with administrators in starting to think about the creativity that we can do with some of the courses, and we'll continue to do that. There are also some pretty intensive focus groups occurring right now with Shane Saphir and Joe Truss, and we plan to use the data information there. They're working with some of our more marginalized groups to get an idea of what we can do to support them in unique ways. Those focus groups aren't targeted specifically to the expanded learning grant, but we do think that there'll be some really good insights on how we can support our students that are probably most affected by the pandemic. Can move to the next slide. So our next steps, because this is one-time money and because it's related to what we've experienced over this past year, a lot of what we're going to use to direct the funds and think about the programs we develop is based on the student needs. So we are going to continue to monitor student grades, take a look at the universal screeners. We have the new tool of BARC, which I know has been providing us with information on how students are doing and feeling and some of the things that are coming up for them. And we'll use this data to make adjustments to kind of our plan here. And unfortunately, we would probably start planning for summer school for 2022 will happen almost as soon as we start summer school this year, just because we really do want to make that a really robust, engaging opportunity for students in the hopes that we are fully back to normal by that point in time. And then we also, some of our next steps will post and identify staffing for the extended days, school day programs and some of these creative course offerings once we've gotten the initial approval for it. And then, a piece of the grant is to ensure that we are communicating with families and our students on how they can access these supports. And that has been some of the important input that we've received from DLAC and some of our other communities. Just how do we make sure if you create these supports and they're creative and they're available, ensuring that we're recruiting and that, families have access to them is a big piece of it. And the grant paperwork that you'll see next week asks us to be really specific on how we'd go about doing that. So those are some of our next steps. And I think that is the end of the presentation, and we're open to take input questions on this.
Trustee Hanley.
So I like a lot of the things about this. The one thing that isn't coming across to me in this, and maybe you can elaborate on it if it's there, is I think we need to really build relationships with the families of these students, and strengthen the relationships with the community there if we're gonna have the maximum impact. I think these programs are good programs. What we've got to get is a stronger buy-in from the families, and I'm thinking particularly in the Latino population, which is one of our strongest demographic groups, and where we've really struggled to make progress. And I think this is this is a chance where we've got an opportunity to make some progress, and it's coming across. I mean, I'm listening to what we're trying to do, but it's not coming across as we're putting enough emphasis on building the relationships. And so maybe talk to me about how we are doing that, if we are, maybe think about how we can do that in moving forward. Because I think the key is you've got to get buy-in to really make progress in that and get these students really participating vigorously in these programs.
Trustee Land. Oh,
If you would like us to respond, I will just say I really appreciate that comment and totally agree that that is a really important component of it. And it is part of what the grant, as I was mentioning at the end there, part of what the grant says is like, you be clear about how you communicate the programs and that the programs are serving who you are trying to serve. And, you know, Brian and I did attend the DLAC meeting and talk through some of this with our Latino representatives and others that were at that meeting to talk about like, how do we reach out? And a lot of what the DLAC recommendations that you heard a few meetings ago are really aligned to some of the work that we need to do. So what we can incorporate from their recommendations into this is what we're going to try to do. So on that point, one of the things that they mentioned, if you remember, was the strengthening the relationships by ensuring that we're making contact directly with the families in their native language about the good things that are going on in the schools and being more direct about that, because some of it is being done via email and that's not really working. So we are talking about how do we strengthen that. And, you know, I did have a conversation with one of our principal, Yvonne, today, and we were talking about how do we support in this, ensuring that there is someone that is on campus with a teacher that can make these kind of moments of interpretation around what's happening, because sometimes the best person to hear from is the teacher because they have the most, you know, direct relationship with that family. So there definitely is more to come on that topic. I really appreciate that comment, Peter, because it's right on it. We have to build these for in service of them, not what we think they might need, but what they do need.
Yeah, I almost think about recruiting a couple of people that have community organizer backgrounds. I think if you get somebody who has that kind of experience, you know, along with some of the other experience that you need, that's what you're looking for is somebody who goes right out into the neighborhoods and works the neighborhoods. Consider that.
Thank you. Yeah.
Trustee Land.
I totally agree. The relationship aspect is important. I think, Julia, you really mentioned something that how do we connect the teachers to be able to help with the communication? I think that's something that you can explore or should explore a little bit further. So I love that. And please go with that. Maybe it's trying to get someone who's like what Peter's talking about, can get connecting the teachers and what they need to say with the parents in some way and how to make that happen on a regular basis, I think is going to be important. Continuing with this idea of relationships, before I say that, I just want to say overall, great presentation. I love how the buckets of money and where we're putting it. I think it was well thought out, Brian and Julia. I love that we've really thought through all these different areas, and it looks like there's potential for some really great innovations. And I think that's what Peter and I have been talking about for a long time. And I think this is kind of fits the bill, at least mostly. The next part is going back to relationships. Then we go talk about the classroom and engagement with students. And that's something that I think is still something we need to pry and pick at and really work on. If it's, you know, going back to Ms. Rustia's comment, it's how can teams work together to get lower class size for sections for even a temporary period of time to really build that engagement on a more deeper level in certain classes for certain students who really need it. And that goes back to the whole equity lens that give the students what they need. And that's not just extra beyond, it's within the programs that are given in the regular classes. And I think that's something that we need to explore to at least to some degree, at least with the one-time monies that is not in this grant, but combined with it. And I think your buckets are great and continue with that, but use what we just talked about in the last one where there's a few million left over, where how can we be creative at sites and use the support either through aides or through teachers or through lower class sizes with adding more sections, with coordinating sections. However we can do that, I think that's something that we don't want to miss. So anyway, great report. Thank you.
Please, Dwyer.
I remain concerned about the 1.7 million that is being devoted to the anti-racism professional development. I want to make sure that every penny of that has an impact on students, that every penny of that, it's a huge amount of money. And I know we have a limited time to use it, but it's not a limited need. I think it's a very, very big need. And I am concerned that every student be touched, every student have a mirror, every student is made more aware of bias and anything, that they're given tools and that they're given insight. And I think connecting to the teachers is incredibly important because they are such strong role models for students. But I'd really, maybe I should see like more about the program. I was not able to attend that focus group thing. So if you want to send me more details on it, it's a huge amount of money and I want every penny of it to have value to every student that comes in our doors, because they are the future, and it's not something we can solve quickly. It's something they need to solve over years of time. And I want it to be done. And I want them to walk away, everyone to walk away with something that's so meaningful that it will help them change behaviors. So I'd love to see more information on that.
Okay, Trustee Andrade Zuniga.
Thank you so much for the presentation. I think both of them tonight were really great. Your work is always really well done. But I want to also say, I like all the ideas that have been presented tonight from the board. But I want to also see some more intersection of different groups, because there are definitely some of our underrepresented groups that are still not represented enough. For example, the Polynesian groups, the community, and perhaps we could even do, I don't know, some intersected community collaborations with different underrepresented groups, the Latino groups and the Polynesian groups, and that maybe with the Black Parents Association. So like just more collaborative programming for parents. But I also really would like to see some of our struggles targeted, some more work around consent and abuse prevention in the with sexuality education and things like that. Because we definitely need some support around that type of education, but pulling in our LGBT groups as well. So again, a lot more intersection I'd like to see. Thank you.
Okay, I just got a couple of comments, and I share Trustee Lees Dwyer's comment. That's $1.7 million is a lot of money, and we could burn through it and really not touch what get our message out. And I don't know what we're calling everybody these days, because I have to Trustee Land keeps me on the straight and narrow, but I thought it was Latinx and APIs, and now we're just throwing terms out. So I need to know what the correct proper terms are to be inclusionary here. So, but I think the detail, the devil will be in the details, particularly on the anti-racism and how that money is programmed and how it's evaluated. So anyway, those are my comments. It's a great opportunity, and I know Ward's been looking for a way to make a structural change and not go back to the way it was, and here's an opportunity. So any other comments?
Can I say one last thing? This is a great opportunity for our district to be a leader and to be a great example to other districts of what we're doing here, and how we're moving forward on really putting, really putting what we say into practice. I mean, everyone can say, oh, we want to do more equity work and, we want to do more inclusionary stuff, but actually doing it is where it is. So I'm very proud that we're working towards this stuff. So thank you.
Do we have any other comments? Okay, do we have any other items or business? Okay, well, I think it's about time to adjourn so I can go back to work. Thank you. Good night.
Buenas